Welcome to Nursing the Nation, the podcast where we dissect today's headlines, current events, and hot topics through the uniquely insightful lens of our nursing expertise. I'm Jamie Bourgeois, a midwife and psychiatric nurse practitioner.
And I'm Melissa Ann Dubois, an experienced perinatal nurse. We are both nursing PhD students, and together we use our nursing expertise to break through the jargon and political noise to explore the human element of current affairs, providing a grounded and compassionate understanding of the issues that impact us all.
Because when it comes to understanding the pulse of our society, who better to ask than the most trusted profession? Hello, Nursing the Nation listeners. I'm Jamie Bourgeois.
And I'm Melissa Ann Dubois. Today is part 3.2 of our analysis on the MAHA Strategy Report, which was the follow-up to the MAHA Report. As you are aware, the MAHA Report, Make America Healthy Again, comes from an executive order by President Trump in February 2025 and chaired by HHS Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. The commission that was created through the executive order was charged with producing an assessment of childhood chronic disease drivers, as well as a comprehensive strategy to address them. Last episode, we covered some of the MAHA Strategy Report's third pillar, which is increasing public awareness and knowledge. This particular section covers a wide gamut of topics in which the HHS is focusing on through public awareness campaigns about health concerns that affect children and empower parents to make informed choices by increasing transparency and access to reliable health and nutrition information. They state these efforts will help restore trust in public health recommendations and encourage healthier lifestyles in American families.
Right. In last episode, we discussed the plan for the MAHA Commission to work on messaging programs within the schools, which they call Make American Schools Healthy Again, which is right on brand. Mm-hmm. This is around nutrition, physical fitness, and exposure to things like fluoride. Sorry, I'm just like always flabbergasted about fluoride. But anyway, we didn't discuss it in really any great detail, but another initiative that they'll take is a broader surveillance on chemical and pesticide exposures to better inform agencies on how to protect and advise the public on that technical data. So basically, this is meant to direct the EPA on research trajectories, but also just like, hey, public, we're just going to make you aware that these chemicals do this and that when humans are exposed to it. That's it. That's what that means. But today, what we will be focusing on is their strategy around pediatric mental health, screen time, substance use, alcohol use, and vaping. And I will say, I think I can speak for both of us here, Melissa, that we agree as nurses and as parents that these are very important topics.
Absolutely.
I can say at the mom level, this is certainly stuff that's on my mind. It's also a lot on my mind because it's what I do for work as a psychiatric nurse practitioner, working with exclusively kids and adolescents and very young adults. And so, on a mom level, I really hope that I have done a good enough job to equip my daughter to make good choices for herself as she's, getting older. She's a high schooler. And I want to continue to do that. But I also know that even under the best of circumstances, parenting is a crapshoot, right? So, our ability as parents to fully control and shape our kids' health is limited, especially when we have to parent in a system that does not make it easy when your personal resources are limited. And that is something that MAHA never seems to address.
Absolutely. Like you said, we only have so much control over our children and their choices. So we need help from the system, right?
Yeah.
So what we're going to show today is a pattern that keeps coming up. Every time MAHA names a youth mental health problem, the proposed solution narrows the responsibility down to the individual child or family, and every structural support that actually addresses these issues is being cut at the same time. Where to begin, Jamie? Do you want to just dive straight into pediatric mental health?
Well, yeah, because, that appeals to my wheelhouse.
All right. So the MAHA Strategy Report states, quote, HHS will ensure the Pediatric Mental Health Care Access Program at the Health Resources and Services Administration, or HRSA, is effective at providing access to pediatric mental health professionals, especially as youth anxiety and depression are increasing and are linked to factors such as screen time, vaping, poor nutrition, and lack of physical fitness. HRSA will work with the President's Council on Sports, Fitness, and Nutrition to educate and empower good nutrition, physical activity, and mental well being. The other piece here is how mental health is being addressed through a fitness council because youth depression will certainly be cured through physical fitness, right?
Right, right,
It's
right.
just a miracle we found this cure. But in all seriousness, there is a lot of misreading and misunderstanding of research by MAHA.
Yeah.
That's no
Yeah.
surprise. That's also
Yeah.
on brand.
Yeah,
You know,
exactly.
specifically, of course, in this section, the biggest misunderstanding is the claim that screen time is directly
Mm,
linked to increased rates of depression and anxiety, vaping, and lack of physical fitness in kids. As most things, the truth just isn't that clear cut or direct. There's always nuance to every one of
exactly.
these, situations.
Exactly, exactly. And so we'll talk about that nuance. And there was a more recent study that came out of Australian youth that found large amounts of screen time was actually not linked to depression or anxiety. So I can hear Bobby now saying, like, but this is a study of Australian kids, like this has nothing to do with American kids, which is often his positioning in arguing that other Western countries cannot be compared to the US. Except for all the times the MAHA Commission has used studies based on populations outside of the US to bolster their own arguments around vaccines and fluoride.
Bingo.
Ugh. So there's that. So, like, if it's a study of another Western culture that's similar to America, so, like
The
many parts
UK,
of Europe, yeah,
yeah, parts of Europe, yeah,
Australia, whatever, like, if it does not support their claims, then it doesn't work for us because it's not American.
right.
But when it does, when like the one about the fluoride, for instance, that was looking at a bunch of Asian countries that had 4 to 17 times the amount of fluoride,
Right.
exposure in their, drinking water or public water or groundwater, etc. Like, and all the bad things that were happening because of that, that was their,
Their
you
only
know,
evidence.
yeah, that was their evidence for why let's take fluoride out of the public water in the United States. But anyway, so clearly cherry picking here. So
Right.
I want to get back to this Australian study. So I would argue to say that Australian kids are likely very similar in their social media consumption and trends, in their peer relationships than, as American kids. Getting back to this, and this was published in 2025, and of course, we'll always have the links on our Substack. The researchers looked at a cross-sectional and longitudinal association between screen time and depression and anxiety and the influence of maladaptive social media use. And they also looked at gender across these things too. Like, so is it different in boys versus girls, etc. A simpler way of saying that is the study followed kids over a longer period of time to see if the screen time was connected to depression or anxiety at later points. And they also looked at whether using social media in unhealthy ways, for instance, like looking at social media and like comparing themselves, judging their own self-worth to what they're seeing online, and whether the results looked different between boys versus girls with those
Right.
behaviors. And so what they found was that screen time, including the maladaptive ways of comparison and self-worth, was only weakly associated with depression at the initial measurement of the study onset. And it had no association on depression or anxiety a year later. So interestingly, the researchers did cite some limitations around how they measured this because the tool that they used didn't account for the modern concepts of toxic positivity and doom scrolling.
Hmm.
And, just to clue you in case you're not well versed in things like Gen Z slang, toxic positivity is the act of always spinning a forced optimism within your social media context and or content. So, think of like hashtag positive vibes only, those sort of posts,
Mhm.
never really showing that things are not always great.
Right.
And doom scrolling is like, and this is something you doesn't matter what age you are, I think we all do this. Doom scrolling is like compulsively consuming negative content. So you end up in these rabbit holes, right? And you just keep scrolling on things, and it's just like, oh my god, this now, and oh my god, this headline. Ugh. And I speak to myself, like, I can get this on Reddit all the time, right? Like, that's the one social media I'll go to and like read and read and read. And I could end up in like one negative post. It has like a negative headline, and then you just keep clicking down more and more. It's negative. It can be emotionally upsetting sort of content, and but you just keep going. And the bottom line from this recent paper is that there is no direct evidence, but there is also a need to study the phenomenon with better tools. So basically, they're saying we didn't see it. There didn't seem to be any long-term effects on depression, anxiety, and kids who consume social media even negatively. But we also used an older tool, so maybe we didn't capture it. So there is that. But there's nothing definitive, is bottom line there.
Right. Another paper from 2021 reached a subtler and more important conclusion. Screen time in itself is unlikely to cause increased mental health problems. Rather, the relationship depends on screen content and activities. In other words, quote, screen time as a unit is almost meaningless
Hmm.
because doom scrolling, video chatting with a friend, or doing homework are not interchangeable activities. Clearly, there is nuance to the type of screen use kids are engaged in. Older work also shows the relationship likely operates in both directions. For example,
Mm.
is it that depressed kids retreat to screens or that screens depress kids, right? It's like, which way is the
Right, right,
association going, right? And it could be just as much that depressed kids retreat to screens as much as screens depress kids.
right,
And that's what gets displaced by screens. That's also important, right? What is being replaced by the
right,
screens, if anything, right? If a kid's getting adequate exercise, sleep, and outdoor time, maybe their screen time doesn't matter. But if screen time is replacing exercise, sleep, and outdoor
right.
time or meaningful relationships with real humans in their life, right?
Hmm.
That's a different story. So I think it's fair to say that there may be something going on with screens and mental health. I mean, I think any parent intuitively can feel this way, and I
Yeah.
understand that. But it's
Hmm.
far from settled science, okay? This doesn't consider other contributors that have been identified as negative drivers of mental health. For example,
Mm.
poverty, climate anxiety, school
Mm.
shootings, post pandemic life,
Yeah.
economic, everything disruption,
Right.
social isolation, marginalization,
Yep.
et cetera, right?
Yep.
So let's move on to vaping and substance use that the MAHA Commission says is contributing to kids' poor mental health. Bobby's report frames vaping and substances as part of the worsening mental health crisis. But federal data from the
Right.
National Institutes of Health says otherwise. The NIH funded Monitoring the Future survey found that in 2025, for the fifth consecutive year, U.S. teen drug and alcohol use remained at a historic low, and the pandemic era drop that we saw never reversed. Abstention is at record highs. In 2025, 91% of eighth graders, 82% of 10th graders, and 66% of 12th graders reported no use of marijuana, alcohol, or
Mm.
nicotine. Alcohol specifically continued its downward trajectory, with binge drinking reported by just 1% of ninth graders, 2% of 1% of eighth graders,
Yes.
2% of 10th graders, and 9% of 12th graders. The National Institute on Drug Abuse director Nora Volkov called the overall results encouraging.
I would agree.
I would also agree. I
Yeah.
mean, any is too much, but still, that's,
Yeah.
I
I mean,
mean,
that is like worlds different compared to my generation.
absolutely. I mean, there was a
Oh, yeah.
smoking section in my high school when my parents went to school there, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
let me emphasize the National Institute on Drug Abuse's own current data show teen substance use at historic lows is essentially the federal government's own research arm contradicting
Yeah.
the MAHA strategy's premise. Like
Right.
it's just like you can't make this up. Okay. However, one nuance to discuss is that even though vaping rates fell, a Journal of the American Medical Association, JAMA, Network Open journal
Journal.
analysis found that among current vapers, daily nicotine vaping rose from 15% in 2020 to
Mm,
29% in 2024. And unsuccessful quit attempts among daily vapers rose from 28% to 53%. So the remaining users are more addicted and are
yeah.
struggling more to stop. Second, nicotine pouch sales rose 250% between January 2023 and August 2025, which is a new flavored nicotine on ramp worth watching. Now, I am embarrassed to say that I had to look up what a nicotine pouch was. I had an idea. I
Really?
mean, it's pretty descriptive. But as a mom of a 13-year-old, I need to know these things. So I did a little research for y'all if anybody's in the same boat as me.
Yeah.
Nicotine pouches are small, semi permeable microfiber packets containing nicotine flavorings and plant based fibers that users place inside their mouth, I'm guessing their cheek, to
Yeah.
absorb the nicotine into the bloodstream.
Yeah.
Unlike traditional smokeless products like chewing tobacco or snuff, they are completely tobacco free and do not require spitting. So,
That's
what does that
lovely.
mean? That
They don't have to
means
walk around with a spittoon.
exactly. That means that they can be more discreet about it, which is problematic for parents and teachers and the
Yeah.
like, right?
Although I have to tell you, like, I mean, this is not a kid. I mean, I've seen it in some of the parents who bring their kids in,
Yes.
to where I work, and they are like stuffing their cheeks with
Oh
these
God, my
pouches.
grandfather used to chew tobacco, and I like I
Ugh.
still like the spit cup that he
I
would
know.
use. Ah, it's so
Yeah.
gross. So I mean, I guess I'm glad that they're not spitting in public, but also as a parent, I'm like, crap. This is yet another way, right? Those
Yeah.
vape pens, they are
Yeah.
so small.
Yeah. They're
You can
very
barely.
discreet.
They look like they're like wiping their top lip, and really they're
Yep.
vaping, right? It's
Yeah.
crazy.
Yeah.
But the long term trends are genuinely encouraging, which makes it strange for a strategy to lean on these behaviors as drivers of a worsening crisis when the real, narrower problems like nicotine pouches, enforcement against illegal products, and addiction hardening, which in public health and addiction science is the theory that
Mhm.
as a substance becomes less popular or more heavily regulated, the remaining pool of users become increasingly dependent, heavily addicted, and highly
Right.
resistant to quitting. So, why isn't the MAHA strategy actually targeting those things,
Mhm.
which would actually make a difference instead of this red herring of this worse? Everything's a worsening crisis, right? But when you look at the data, no, it's not. It's
Right.
not that crime is up. It's not that drug and substance use behaviors among teens is up.
Right.
It's not. There are real problems, but the strategy is not targeting what the
Right.
data is showing.
Exactly. And it also isn't targeting what we just, we're beating the same drum over and over here with the social determinants, right? But
Right.
how can we not? Because it is clearly missing across the board. The other thing I think that is important to know, like vaping, like the statistics that the JAMA open access article was naming was not just teens. Like that was just vaping across the board. And
Got
that's
it.
true. I mean, the amount of adults
Yeah.
that vape is amazing to me. And I'm sure you can even remember. There was even I don't even know if it's I'm sure it's not even a thing on the market anymore, but maybe like 25 years ago there was like a product, like an e-cigarette product to help people stop cigarette smoking.
Hmm.
And like it was before like vaping was a thing like you could just
Right.
purchase, and it was touted as a method to help people stop smoking.
Right. Because you
And
could
then it
titrate down the nicotine in the
right.
capsules or whatever, like the
Yeah.
cartridge. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, it was, I mean, it looked like a cigarette. I remember the
Yes.
commercials, like some guy driving in a, old convertible, like Chevy Impala or something. It's like, I don't know why it sticks into my brain, but it's just like, and pitching the whole, like, oh, this this is helping me stop cigarettes and blah, blah, blah. But then, within a very short period of time, vaping became accessible on the market. And now look where we are. But anyway,
I mean, and also I want to just drop this little point here that Trump wants to reverse the ban on flavored vape products, which we know almost exclusively appeal to children. Not that adults don't use them, but
oh, they do.
that, that's
Yeah.
that's that's what that's what's driving the kid market into vaping.
Oh, of course. Yeah. Because I mean, I guess I'd say, like, in all fairness, like, I mean, I was never a kid that had any interest in trialing substances or smoking. As a matter of fact, I thought smoking was disgusting.
Yeah.
Always did. And you just didn't like the smell of cigarettes. Mind you, like during my nursing school days, I would tolerate it, like, because we could still go out to the bar, and smoking in public places and restaurants and bars and stuff was still a thing. And I can remember, like, the next morning having a shower and, like, literally having the cigarette smoke washing out of my hair, like, from, like, how much, just being surrounded by it. But I was never somebody I've never smoked a cigarette in my life. And would I have vaped something that smelled like sweet? Maybe. I don't
Yeah.
know. Because, I mean, it's hard for me to say for certain because, at, like, just about 50 years old, I don't know, like, what would my 20-year-old brain been thinking? Probably something stupid. And, like, maybe I would have been like, "Hey, this is not cigarettes. Hey, I'm hanging out at the bar with everybody and we're having a good time and everybody's vaping and it smells good."
Right.
I can see why that would take off with kids, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, I totally diverted that. But I want to come back to this claim that anxiety and depression in kids is increasing broadly because this has been a trend for the last 10 years, but it doesn't demonstrate the nuances of these rates. And the CDC's Youth Risk Behavior Survey shows that there was an increase in reported persistent sadness or hopelessness. In 2013, 30% of youth reported those feelings, and it went up to 40% in 2023. But if you look at the years in between, there is a slight decrease from its peak in 2021. Now, remember what was going on in 2021.
I mean,
Um,
certainly my sadness and hopelessness was pretty high in
yeah,
2020.
I think everybody in 2021 was suffering in some way. And so in 2021, the 42% of kids who answered that survey experienced persistent sadness and hopelessness. But 2 years later, it came down a few points. And the CDC itself framed this 2023 release of data as showing improvements in mental health among some US teens. And they included decreases in the percentage of feeling persistently sad or hopeless from, these last few years. And
Right.
MAHA, okay, wait, let me just pause on this one because it just makes me angry. MAHA entirely omits statistics on gendered and LGBTQ disparities from this data. So in 2024, the CDC's survey on youth risk behavior did not account for any of that because, of course they're going to not include that data. And there's a reason why that makes me angry. We'll get into. The same administration releasing the strategy report, ostensibly concerned about youth anxiety and depression, has been simultaneously dismantling the specific services that reach the highest burdened groups.
Right.
So, you may have heard of the 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline. You can also text that, by the way, which is something I think younger folks would feel much more comfortable. And I always tell
Absolutely.
the kids that see me, like, you can always text 988. Older people will say, "Oh, call 988," and, like, young people are not calling on the phone. Like, that is
Right.
like the most foreign thing in the world to them. maybe FaceTiming. I suppose if you could FaceTime, which is weird, like you could FaceTime them, but do
It's
not
so
call them
true.
on a traditional phone.
Exactly. I don't get it.
It's weird. But anyway, so if you were to call, they took away what was press three. So, you get like the automated, if this, press that.
Hmm.
So the press three option was the specialized LGBTQ youth subnetwork on this service. And let's see, back just about a year ago, June 18th, 2025, it was confirmed that the Trump administration was, going to be cutting that particular service. That was $33 million in funding. And let's see. Oh, the Trevor Project. The Trevor Project notes that it directly served more than 231,000 crisis contacts in 2024. They trained nearly 250 crisis counselors to support that section of the 988 Lifeline. And now, I guess at one point they were receiving up to $50 million in federal funds to do this and provide these life-saving services. But, you know, let's get rid of that, right?
I feel so badly, not only for everybody that's suffering that won't have
Yeah.
access to that, but for the thousands of mental health advocates that worked for decades to
Mm,
get this
mm,
lifeline established.
yes.
Like this 988 suicide and crisis lifeline was a result of decades and decades of advocacy work.
Yes.
It's just it
Yep.
it's so unbelievable to me.
Yep. And it particularly I think the populations that worked even harder was the LGBTQ population because they experience mental health challenges at higher rates. And it's not
Right.
because there's something inherently wrong with them. This, I feel like, is a conversation I have often with some of the young folks that come and see me. There is nothing wrong with them, but what messages they are receiving from often adults in their life is what contributes to
Hmm.
their worse rates of depression, anxiety, suicidality, etc. So they are a population that does need extra support around this. And
Hmm.
what MAHA, the Trump administration, Bobby, all of that wing is like, well, they don't really count, they don't need it, whatever. Like basically an FU, right?
Right.
And it's, what does that say to these kids? I mean, it's just so frustrating. But anyway, this population has the highest documented rates of suicidality. And that is why it's like, let me back this up. Another population, I think this would probably not come as a surprise to anybody who's listening, is veterans, right? Veterans
Mm.
also are a special population that experience higher rates of mental health issues. And therefore, 988 also has a special kind of subsection for them
Hmm.
to quote single out like these populations is not just because we want to single them out. It's because they need that extra support.
Right.
This particular population, LGBTQ, with the highest documented rates of suicidality, depression, anxiety, you name it, now has been defunded. And this is all happening at the same time that the MAHA Commission saying, oh, but we have this rising youth anxiety and depression problem.
Right.
Okay, so MAHA tells us youth are sad because, screens and snacks, right?
Right.
Like, oh, they're watching too much screens and they're eating crappy food. The CDC's own data tells us that youth are sad in patterns that map almost perfectly onto who has been marginalized, harassed, threatened, and legislated against. If you are a cisgendered boy, not six-gendered, which I think is what Trump heard. Do you remember that? And he called
Yeah.
James Talarico, he's six genders. And
Yeah.
I think it was really someone said he's
This
cisgendered. But anyway,
yeah.
I digress. So if you are a cisgender boy, your odds of reporting persistent sadness are about 1 in 4. So about 25% of teen cisgender boys. But if you are transgender teen, that increases to 3 and 4, 75%.
Yeah. I mean, that's so
It's striking.
upsetting. Yeah.
And I will say anecdotally that aligns.
Yeah.
High percentage in comparison to just general population, a high percentage of the kids that I see fall into an identity within LGBTQ.
Hmm.
So this isn't just, alternative facts, right? We
Right.
always talk about that.
Oh
Like, no,
God.
this is true. This is true. These kids are suffering. But again, like I say to them, it is nothing wrong with them.
Right.
And the administration is releasing this strategy where they're cutting these LGBTQ specific lifelines that over 200,000 kids used last year. And when we ask whether MAHA is taking pediatric mental health seriously, the answer is really who gets named and who gets cut. I mean,
Right.
I guess that's really the bottom line.
Yeah. And don't forget, MAHA also wants to limit part of mental health treatment options for kids. Medications.
Right.
We recognize that medication is not the panacea for everyone, but it
Right.
certainly is a useful tool for some, including myself and some of my own children. And to limit this would be not only a national disaster, but a Dubois household disaster.
I hear you on this. Yes, I
I
hear
don't
you.
want to go back to the Dubois household
Same.
pre-Zoloft, pre
Yes.
methylphenidate, and
Yep.
pre-Vyvanse. I don't want to go back to that. Okay?
I hear you.
God.
Mhm.
Okay. So part of the strategy, as we've mentioned previously, is establishing a working group to evaluate prescribing patterns for SSRIs, antipsychotics, mood stabilizers, and stimulants for children, and to evaluate diagnostic thresholds and overprescription trends. Now, I'm not against monitoring. I'm not against research. I do
Right.
think that,
We already do that though.
yes, exactly. That's my point. Yes. Back in September 2025, though, RFK Jr. and Education Secretary Linda McMahon criticized student mental health screenings in a Washington Post essay,
Oh, yes.
arguing they risk overdiagnosing conditions and unnecessarily pathologizing students. So the Make America Schools Healthy Again plan means to have schools focus on fitness and nutrition curricula while social emotional learning is being attacked. The school environment is being narrowed at the exact moments kids need the more broader mental health supports.
Right.
So this is basically talking out of both sides of your mouth. Let's have more access to some types of mental health care, which still seem unclear.
Yeah.
But let's make it harder to screen, diagnose, and properly treat American children. Like, God.
Yeah. Right. Exactly. Plus, it's also kind of like, hey, if we don't look, we
won't find. Oh,
Right.
absolutely. There's absolutely part of that. The fact that Bobby keeps calling for gold standard research and more research into things that already have settled science, but
Right.
they are cutting, right? They
Yeah.
are omitting data from published reports on LGBTQ, disparities, and they
Right.
are cutting. They're cutting programs to, monitor other types of like gun violence and things like that. It's like, if we don't test it, right, then we don't get the results, and if we don't get the results, then we can stick our head in the sand and say, oh, this problem's going down.
Right.
Right?
Exactly. Yeah. Because if you're not looking at it and you're not measuring it, then hey, look what we fixed.
Exactly. Exactly. It's
Yeah.
incredibly frustrating as a scientist. But anyway.
It's kind of like if I never step on the scale.
Yeah, exactly.
I still weigh 120 pounds, Melissa.
100%. Exactly.
Yes.
Yeah.
The other thing too that's going on is they are also like removing anything within public school curriculum that teaches or emphasizes empathy, understanding, and social emotional learning. And schools can be safe havens, or they can be one of the most dangerous places for our kids. And I would argue that they are probably both at both times,
Yes.
right? And these initiatives will clearly disadvantage more kids than what we presently have.
Right.
So consider this. The CDC also documents that 25.3% of transgender students and 26.4% of LGBTQ questioning students have skipped school because they felt unsafe, and compare that with 8.5% of cisgendered male. And additionally, an estimated 40% of transgender and questioning students are bullied at school, and 72% of transgender students experience persistent sadness or hopelessness. And I can say, again, I see this on a clinical level. I treat these children. And unfortunately, a disproportionately high percentage of my overall patient population within community mental health practice are kids who identify as trans or gay or queer. And so much of what influences their mental health is the safety that they feel both at home and at school.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes they have neither.
Right.
So some kids get families who unconditionally love them, who doesn't matter who they are, but not feeling accepted as just one of the kids in their school. And add to that the constant messaging from government leaders how it is illegal to basically exist.
Right.
Well, gee, I can't imagine why they have higher rates of depression, anxiety, and suicidality.
Right.
What a mystery.
What a mystery.
Yeah. And so let's review a little bit of what's happening along all of that. So there's this push to ban gender affirming care. There's proposed limits on psychiatric medications and certain services. States are passing anti-transgender laws that we now have peer review evidence to suggest that actually is causing an increase of suicide attempts in teens.
Mm-hmm.
So you don't get to do all of that and then turn around and say like, hey, let's just limit the screen time and add some exercise. Like that's going to fix what you just broke.
Right.
And, here's another thing, like as a nurse and as a parent, you do not have to personally understand what it means to be non-cisgendered or be gay or any identity outside of a Christian heteronormative frame to live and let live,
Yeah.
right? Dignity and respect are not contingent on understanding.
Yeah. I was reading this morning, I don't remember the state, but there was a governor and a lieutenant governor in some state that chose this month, Pride Month, to declare it like, National Nuclear Family Month or something like
Oh,
that.
yes.
The
Yeah.
nuclear family being one man, one woman, mom, dad married with, 2.5 children, right?
Yeah.
And the article was saying that currently in the United States today, that's only 47% of American families. That's the minority. Because guess what?
Mhm.
It's not just two dads or two mom families. It's single parent families. It's grandparents raising children, right? It's multi-generational households.
Right.
And isn't that beautiful? Like isn't the fact that we all are different beautiful? Like that, I know
Mhm.
my bleeding heart is gonna make a mess of my desk, but it's just like I grew up in I would say, very non-traditional family. It might have looked like it traditional from the outside. I lived with a man and a woman and my brothers and sisters in a house. But guess what? My mom and dad got divorced when I was little, and they
Yeah.
both remarried. And so I actually had my mom and my sister and I, were the original two. And then my mom and dad got divorced and they both got remarried. And my dad married my stepmom and had three more kids. And my mom married my stepdad and had two more kids. And we lived next door to my stepdad's parents, who adopted me immediately as one of their own grandchildren, right? Even though I was, 4 or 5 years old when they finally got, together,
Yeah.
and 7 when they got married. My Grammy and Grampy always were my Grammy and Grampy to me. They weren't
Yeah.
Anne Marie's kids. They were, our grandchildren, right? Like it. And so it was funny because as a kid, when when people would talk about their families, I was like, well, I have all of these grandparents, right? Because I had
Yeah.
like my mom's grandparents. No, sorry, my mom's parents. I had my dad's parents. My dad also was raised, his quote mother was actually his aunt,
Oh.
because my dad's mother left him as a baby,
Oh.
and the state wouldn't allow my grandfather to raise a child on his own because, God forbid, a man raise a child on his own. So the state gave my
What?
grandfather custody only if he moved in with his sister, who
Wow.
was my dad's aunt. So I had my mom's parents, my grandparents, my dad's parents as grandparents, my dad's aunt, who he called mom, and all of his cousins, who he called sisters, were my aunts. Then I had my stepmother's family as my, a family, and my stepfather's family as my family. And so I would name off these grandparents. And I'll never forget one time somebody was like, why do you have so many grandparents? And I couldn't answer it because to me that was normal. I had
Yeah.
all these people that loved me, and it didn't matter if they were blood related or not. We
Right.
were a beautiful family in all of the ways that we were. And so I have a few points to make.
Yep.
If you're wondering, Jamie.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Melissa, what do you think about
so
this?
number one, this panic over empathy and
Mm,
social emotional learning is
yes.
bizarre and ridiculous. Social emotional
Yeah.
learning isn't some rogue political ideology creating, wussy kids, right?
Right.
It's literally just teaching kids how to regulate their emotions,
Mm,
resolve conflicts without violence,
yep.
and build resilience. Everybody, something I think every single person in this current administration would be better off if they were taught as children. Okay.
Yeah.
As a nurse, we don't just view empathy as a nice feeling. It is a critical life competency. Okay. When public leaders demand we strip empathy out of schools, like our
Mm,
vice president, I hate the word empathy, right? Or whatever.
yeah. Yeah.
Um, like they aren't protecting kids. They're actively handicapping an entire generation's emotional intelligence. They are setting them up to fail, not just as partners and parents down the road, but as
Right.
future professionals in a modern workplace that requires collaboration,
Right.
right? So, okay, that's to me just so
Yep.
insane. Number two, on one hand, public schools were established in the United States to be this ultimate equalizer, right? Because a safe,
Yes.
well funded environment where every child gets an equal shot, regardless of what their home life looks like, and gets an
Yes.
education is important for a thriving citizenship for everybody and to get this so-called American dream, right?
Yeah.
But the corporate and conservative push we're seeing right now to strip schools of resources, demonize teachers, ban the very frameworks that keep vulnerable kids alive is hurting our kids. This administration wants to legislate away the reality that LGBTQ plus kids exist. And when the predictable mental health crisis follows, right? Because
Right.
this is an expected outcome of this.
Yeah.
All right. They point a finger at public education and say, see, it's broken. Let's privatize it. Right. It's a classic strategy.
Right.
Break a public system from the inside by making it a hostile environment,
Yep.
chaotic, whatever, and then use that brokenness to justify tearing it down entirely and passing it over to corporate America. It's predatory and our kids are collateral damage. And then
Hmm.
lastly, let's just look at the absolute clinical gaslighting happening here, right?
Mm,
As nurses, our foundational ethical obligation is to autonomy,
yep.
dignity, self-determination for everybody, period. It is not our job to judge. It is our job to protect and advocate.
Yep.
When states pass laws that explicitly restrict gender affirming care or limit access to evidence based psychiatric services, they are practicing medicine without a license. They are overriding peer reviewed clinical guidelines established by every major medical organization in this country
Mm,
and nursing organization, I would say. And as nurses, we believe bodily autonomy is a non negotiable human right. You cannot
right.
claim to care about mental health while simultaneously outlawing the actual medical and social care that prevents suicide. It's a
Right.
lethal contradiction. You don't get to break the safety net and then prescribe a walk in the park as a cure. Right?
Yes. 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 And Whole Foods and
Exactly.
natural food dyes.
Exactly. Exactly.
Ugh. Yeah. All right. Well, I'd say that wraps up our second part of our take on this third pillar of the MAHA strategy report. We hope you found this episode informative and thought provoking, and we would be honored if you would share it with your family and friends.
Don't forget to subscribe to Nursing the Nation wherever you get your podcasts. Write us a 5-star review and visit us over at Substack, nursingthenation.substack.com. And did you know that you can now sponsor us to support our work? More
Yeah.
on Substack and in your podcast feed. Thank you for tuning into Nursing the Nation. I'm Melissa Ann Dubois.
And I'm Jamie Bourgeois. Till next time. Thanks for joining us on Nursing the Nation, where we discuss the headlines and current events through a nursing perspective. Remember to follow us on your favorite podcast app, leave us a review, and share this episode with someone who needs a nurse's take on the nation. Nursing the Nation is hosted by Jamie Bourgeois and Melissa Ann Dubois. Topic research is done by Jamie and Melissa. Editing is done by Jamie. Music is by Magnus Moon. Head over to our Substack at Nursing the Nation for detailed show notes. We speak from the experiences and expertise of being nurses, but the opinions on this podcast are our own and not representative of any employer, institution, or organization we may be affiliated with. Thanks for listening, and please follow our socials.